Kick us off, Mike Mullin.
So, you know what? I want to first thank everybody for having an opportunity to be able to spend some time with us this evening. You know, considering the situation that we have with the coronavirus right now, it's a little more difficult to be able to get together at the Stryker Center like we would normally want to be able to do. But we just had one of the most consequential General Assembly sessions that we've had, and I would say a generation. It's been about 22 years since Democrats were last in power in either the House or the Senate collectively. In the Senate, they've seemed to have gone back and forth a little bit more than we have in the House. But we had an opportunity to be able to make some substantial changes here to the General Assembly. And I thought maybe we would take a moment to be able to sort of go over a little bit about what we saw in the budget. So, you know, every 2 years, the General Assembly actually puts together a biannual budget, which is that and picking judges are the two primary things that we do as legislators. And there are certainly our two biggest goals. So first was that the governor gave us a budget that I would say had a conservative outlook in terms of the way that our economy was going to be going. It wasn't too rosy and it wasn't too conservative, but it was just about exactly where we needed it to be. What we've seen in the last about 2 to 3 weeks is that some of the rosiness might have come off a little bit, and that we have some real savings that we're going to have to accrue over the course of the next few months. So it's important that we note that first, that we put over $2 billion into our rainy day fund, and that we also have continued to be able to have excess dollars that are going for issues that are necessary going forward. So the governor put in a total general fund spending of about $47.5 billion. The House and the Senate got very close, and we ended up at about $48 billion. So one of the things that you most heard about was actually our investments in higher education and K through 12. So we actually put in approximately $40 million to be able to freeze higher education spending for those colleges and universities that choose to be able to take advantage of those dollars. It's not the most money that we've ever seen, but it is certainly an investment in our colleges and universities to try and be able to keep the cost of going to college as low as possible. But we also actually saw a $200 increase between the proposed budget and the final budget in terms of the average state per pupil direct aid, which is substantial. I mean, at this point, we are now making more investments in K through 12 education than we have in about a generation and a half, certainly since 2007, 2008. And I think that that's something that we need to be able to talk about. The other thing that's important to me is something that I know that Senator Mason and I have worked a long time on, which is the student to counselor ratio, which for a long time has been over 360. We're trying to get that down to 250 students per counselor, and we're well on our way to that. In fact, we are actually ahead of where we were a year and a half ago in terms of being able to get us down to the national average. In terms of healthcare and some of the other stuff, you know, Medicaid forecasting is one of the most difficult things that we can do as a General Assembly. And so the cost of just being able to provide healthcare is very difficult. Luckily, the House and the Senate were roughly in tune, and we were able to have a little bit of savings from that, particularly from Medicaid reimbursements. You know, one of the things that we're going to see a lot of increases in over the next 2 to 3 weeks is going to actually be TANF cash assistance and some of the other sort of financial and I guess you could say food assistance that you're going to be seeing as people start to fall off of the work rolls over the course of 2 to 3 weeks. And so we actually have a lot of opportunity to be able to make some of those investments as well. We saw a 2% increase in state employees, as well as a 2% bonus in the first year. And then finally, we also see significant investments in criminal justice reform, environmental regulation, and you know, every once in a while our teachers. So those are sort of the big things that we've been talking about. But, you know, I mean, there are 10,000 other issues that have come up in the first General Assembly session that we've had in a generation and a half, where we were able to get some real big things done. So, Senator Mason?
Yeah, that's a great start. And I want to piggyback on something Mike said, that, you know, obviously every 24-hour period right now, we get new information on a magnitude that we just can't imagine. And that will very likely continue for the next several weeks. As we went back to vote on the budget on Thursday, several members from the other side of the Senate wanted to tap the brakes. They wanted to pause. They wanted to wait 10 days. And we insisted on moving forward and said that we felt it was very important to show the Virginia that we had put together a fiscally sound budget. Are things going to change? Absolutely. We understand the revenue projections from the economic impact that we're seeing are going to change market. But we started, I remember when I first came to the Senate 4 years ago, I listened to Aubrey Lane, the Secretary of Finance, say that the average state with a AAA bond rating had about 6-7% in a rainy day fund. And at the time, we were under 2. We had like $300 million in a rainy day fund. So we were in a bad way coming off of some very difficult times. We have, over the past 3 or 4 years, put together this year in what we call the caboose budget, which is an adjustment of spending from now until July 1. We've put another $197 million in the reserve in the rainy day fund, with an anticipated $182 million coming in the second year of this budget, which would, as Mike said, bring it to $2.1 billion in reserves. So even if you say we don't have that $400 million that's coming in this budget, we've still got $1.7 billion in reserve. So we put ourselves in a very fiscally conservative position and sound position so that we have an ability to react. And the budget's crafted as it has been regularly. Teachers get a 2% raise in the first year and a 2% raise in the second year. But state employees get a 3% bonus in the first year with a 2% raise that is that is based upon revenue projections, both the teachers and the so it's bonus in the first year, and some state supported local positions also will get 2% bonus in the first year and a 3% raise in the second. So so we've put some bonus money in the first year and an increase for teachers, while at the same time trying to leave some flexibility for revenue projections that may or may not come to fruition. One thing we are doing is $793 million in re-benchmarking our K through 12 education. That's nothing new. That's no new counselors like Mike talked about, us getting to 325 per one for 325 students in this budget. That's no new programs. That's nothing new. That is just getting us to where we need to be based upon spending over the last couple of years. Some things that you've heard us talk about before: intellectually disabled and developmentally disabled waivers, which gives people the ability to get services that they need. There's always a waiting list of 12 to 13,000 people that need it. This is the most I've ever seen us put forward, 1,385 additional waivers in this budget. The conference committee added 250. That was really a House position that they insisted upon waivers. I'll talk about a bill that I was disappointed to see of mine go down, but because the House insisted on waivers. 1,630 new state-supported housing opportunities or places for the severely mentally ill. That's a big step. That's a big burden that we look at our community services boards and our localities to deal with. But that came at the expense of 56 beds at Catawba Hospital and an expansion that I quite frankly disagree with our mental health leaders in the Senate who decided not to go that direction. But I believe that we should have, but we're putting $15 million into pilot projects in localities to try to determine how we can reduce and do something with the incredible capacity that we have in our state-run mental facilities. The governor asked for $140 million for his G3 program, get a job, get skills, get a job, give back. We put about $70 million there, about half of what he asked, but that's because we feel like that it's going to take some time to ramp up the program, and we're focusing on some short-term opportunities with that money. You've heard me talk about Family First, child welfare work that I've been doing. And so you have seen, we had about $68 million in the governor's budget. We came away with about $45 million to ramp up that new program. So that's some good seed money there that I think is going to be important. So, we are very mindful of what is happening around us. I want to tell you that last Thursday when we went back to vote on the budget, the state epidemiologist spoke to us at 9:30 in the morning, and it was after the governor's, let's stay the course, let's be careful, and never mentioned an emergency declaration that they came up with at 1:00. And that is not a knock on them. They gave us the best information available to them at the time. It is just simply showing you how quickly things are changing as we get more testing. And I want to really emphasize that over the next few weeks, we are going to see a dramatic increase in the number of cases. We know that because we haven't had the necessary testing kits and the testing available to us. That is going to begin to develop, and we know we are going to have more people. So we understand, we really appreciate, as much. I love doing these with Mike at Stryker and in Newport News, but we really appreciate everyone's effort to make sure that we're doing things to mitigate the spread of a disease that we know is going to have an enormous impact on us over the next couple of weeks. But this budget was soundly put together and is ready to absorb that impact.
So building on what Monty was saying is that the governor has a 2.0 or $2.1 billion reserve fund that he can draw from for specific emergency situations like this. And so we're going to be able to see access to resources, the likes of which we are not normally seeing except for in circumstances like a hurricane. We're more used to this level of response when it comes to hurricanes here on the peninsula than we are anywhere else. So that's a significant investment that you're going to be seeing. I know that there were a lot of people on our side of the aisle who are fighting for paid family leave, in particular for people who were looking for sick leave. That ended up dying this session, but I know that a number of people were fighting on that issue, both on the state and the federal level. My hope is that we'll be able to see something like that. But I think this is a good reminder of the fact that people are only one paycheck away from being able to truly be able to protect their families. And so whether that's because of a hurricane, whether that's because of a medical issue, whether that's because of loss of a job, we need to be able to protect those who are most financially, in most difficult situations financially. And so that's one of the things that we prioritized with this budget.
And that sick leave bill, I supported it when it came through with its many flaws that we pointed out. But unfortunately, that was just poorly drafted, and we tried to help. I proposed a solution on Friday night that would have done away with the fiscal impact, but as written, it had an indeterminate fiscal impact on the state of Virginia because they had no floor for the amount of hours you had to work to be eligible. And understand that it was not the panacea, I think, but right now, if you get credit for the first week of the year and the week we're in right now, you would have accrued under that bill 2 sick days. So it is not an answer to the coronavirus challenge, not at all. But there will be better options on a go forward, and we'll do things that don't have the impact that bill had. But unfortunately, some of its backers refused to make adjustments to it, and it died. It died under the weight of the fiscal impact of the state. It would have had about 8,600 employees estimated that would have been eligible for it. And here's the thing. There's no one to blame for that. As much as you'd like to blame people, the fact is there was not money in the budget for that. And in Virginia, that's the way we do business. If you want something, and I'll talk about kinship care in a minute, something I was extremely disappointed that went down on the House side because they didn't have money and they had different priorities. That's fair enough.
So I think that what Senator Mason is talking about is really fair because I think it colors everything that we're doing, is that we are a part-time legislature. And so we are only here for 45 days or 60 days, and that if a new problem like coronavirus shows up in the 50th day, it's very difficult for us to be able to shift and be able to respond when it takes 50 days to be able to wrap up and put together a budget. And so sometimes, the panacea that we're hoping for, like you were saying, with that paid sick day legislation doesn't come in the same way that if it had been in the first or second day. And so we're working as hard as we can to be able to sort of fit the solutions that we have to the problems as they occur. but sometimes it's just difficult when you have a part-time legislature.
And I've never seen as many big issues. And again, you've heard us talk about the pent-up demand over the last decade or arguably two of things that could have been incrementally done that just weren't. But asking a part-time legislator to understand pharmacy benefit managers and what they mean, ask them to understand balanced billing and a solution when the hospitals say A and the health and the insurers say Z, minimum wage, many of the labor issues that we tried to tackle,
right,
and did tackle. This session was unlike any. I've only been there 7 years, 8 years, but this was unlike any I've ever seen as far as the magnitude of issues that we tried to take on.
Well, what are some of the big things that you saw on the Senate side that sort of overtook a lot of our time and our effort in those 60 days?
Well, we had a lot of discussion about the labor issues. We did prevailing wage with a review of what that looks like regionally. We did some opt-in and some optional project labor agreements for localities and for the state. But those come with a great deal of concern to the business community and to major contractors. So we had to try to negotiate things along the way. Minimum wage was the biggest.
That's right.
I recommend to everyone on this call the Commonwealth Institute's budget analysis. They lay out incredibly well the governor, the House position, the Senate position, and the conference that we ended up passing. But their participation on minimum wage was not helpful. It caused us in the Senate a great deal of trouble because, Mike, the House sent over a fairly aggressive minimum wage bill that simply was not past the Senate. And so my job with a handful of others was to put something together that we could get 21 votes in the Senate for, and that the House would accept as well. And we did. But absent a compromise, this is super important. Absent a compromise, we would have gotten nothing through the Senate.
You're absolutely
right. That would have meant that workers that are earning minimum wage on January 1st would not have gotten a 31% increase in wages, which they are going to get next January 1st. Then another dollar, then up to 10 the next January, 11, up to 11 the next January, 12 following. So 3 guaranteed increases with studies along the way of impact to communities and businesses. What does regionalism look like? Is it even a possibility? But with a full-blown review over those 3 years and of what I think is going to show very positive result.
So, can I stop you there? Because I think that's a really interesting dynamic that you just hit on, which is the feisty, hot, ready to go House and the cooling off Senate approach. Because there are a lot of things that came out from the House this year that were progressive as all get out and perhaps didn't ever have the votes in the Senate. And so finding that ability to be able to negotiate was very important. And that, I think that was different in the House than it was in the Senate, I would imagine. Isn't that right?
Very much. And it was very similar. It was 21-19 the other way, the 3 years I've been in the Senate. Now it's 21-19 our way. That is still a very, there are enough issues that you've got 3 to 5 people on both sides that can very often, be on another. It's not necessarily so party line. There are a lot of 21-19s because a lot of things that we've been looking to do over the years that hadn't been done. But yeah, there were some thoughts coming from the House side that because it passed the House and we had 21 votes in the Senate, it was automatically passing the Senate, and that just wasn't the case. But like I said, I am super pleased with many of the things. I'm very proud of the budget that came out. I do understand fully it'll have to be adjusted. We're ready to do that work. I think it was the best session for workers and for labor in maybe the last 50, 60 years. But at the same time, I think we kept a mindful eye on the business community and small business and tried to make sure that the paid sick leave thing is a great example. You can mandate sick leave to private and public employers all you want. If the business ceases to exist, there is no one to pay the employee. That's one of the things we're working on right now with this economic impact of Corona. That is going to be really, really pressing over the next weeks and months.
So I know there are a ton of things that we want to be able to answer questions about. And as soon as we stop talking, they're going to ask us about 10,000 questions. But I wanted to bring up two things that I think that are really important for us as a region. First is sort of sound fiscal policy, and second is transportation. I figured I'd talk a little bit about sound fiscal policy, and then obviously transportation is something that you worked on a long time about. But I wanted to at least talk a little bit about the way that the dynamic has shifted in terms of fiscal policy. So one of the things that we've found over the course of the last decade and a half is that we haven't seen the same kind of investments in infrastructure, particularly transportation infrastructure, that we've really wanted. So, for example, there has never been historically a Richmond transportation district in the same way. We have not had the same sort of floors that we need to on the gasoline tax. And then we had a huge corridor in the I-81 corridor on the western part of the state that was receiving no additional fundings whatsoever. And we've been cutting into Northern Virginia's sort of public transportation funding for a long time. So we had a large scale transportation funding agreement that we saw statewide that established some local transportation groups, that established a floor to the gas taxes, raised some gas taxes, and also in particular started to raise some of the taxes regarding diesel, which we saw from last session, which are really primarily paid by out-of-state trucking organizations. And what we found was that there were a number of states that were paying dramatically less for out-of-state diesel than we were. So people were filling up in North Carolina, driving through Virginia, and then filling up again in Maryland because it was easier to be able to do it that way. So we've set up our financial policy a little bit better. We've also, something that localities have talked about for a long time, is that we set up a parity between the cities and the counties for the first time. So if you're in the county, for years and years and years, you've been very jealous of the taxing authority that the cities had, and vice versa. Now there's actually going to, since I'm going to say 1907, I'm sorry, someone who's better educated on the history of the Commonwealth can educate me, but I believe 1907, we're finally going to be able to have fiscal parity between those two localities. So there's some of the financial things that have been happening, but I think the biggest changes that you're going to see are going to be how we're going to be spending things on transportation infrastructure, particularly on the 64 corridor, particularly on being able to see the Monterey and Merrimack and the HRBT and some of the other stuff that Senator Mason can probably talk about a little bit more.
Well, and you make a great point, bringing up the Richmond Authority that will be the same as the Hampton Roads in the Northern Virginia. But my rural brethren have been making a lot of noise, as they did back when it happened and we weren't there, about the balkanization of transportation. Once you gave the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning, the HRTAC and HRTPO, the authority to raise regional taxes and put the money and keep the money in the region, and you did the same for Northern Virginia, well, now Central Virginia is coming with Richmond. Right? But what you have done there is say, well, you're taking care of that region, but essentially not anything west of my old hometown of Farmville. We did an 81, some 81 work in the reconvened session last year. But this, we did raise, I think the initial plan was 4, 4, and 4 cents, and it ended up 5 and 5. So we did some raising of the gas tax, which essentially will amount to about $20 in the first year and about $40 a year per driver after that. But that gives us a larger pot of money to spend in places that will not ever rise to the level of the smart scale that we set up, that is based upon moving more volume. Because if 460 between Farmville and Lynchburg will never smart scale, right? It just doesn't have enough traffic. So this will give some money to look more statewide. It also has money for the bridge to move rail across the Potomac to Maryland. Yeah. There is a piece that one of my Hampton Roads colleagues was very disappointed about, a new transit authority that's being set up that has 6 members from Northern Virginia, 2 from Central, 2 from Southeastern, and 2 from Western. And it on its face looks like Northern Virginia taking over the world. But the reality is 85% of the traffic is up there. And so they need that type of representation between the metro and the rail that's dealt with up there. One thing the Richmond Authority will really help with, and I'm excited about, is I believe finishing 3 lanes to all the way to Richmond on 64. Because as we've talked about many times, it's about 27 miles on 64 that is not covered under HR TAC or HRTPO. And then there was no authority, and now I think that will take place. So, Mike, why don't you maybe highlight a couple of bills that you had big success on? I do want to say we had different roles. Mike now chairs, they don't call it this anymore, but it will always be, in my mind, Byrne, the criminal subcommittee of the House Courts of Justice Committee. He did a lot of work as a House whip. He has a lot of influential committee assignments. I went from 3 committees to 5 with 3 subcommittees, 2 of which I chaired. One is ABC policy. So, we really had a whole different life up there this year, and it was really good. We're in the middle of a lot of things, and that put Mike in a position to do a lot of positive things with some of his legislation.
Well, that's really kind of you, Monty. So, everybody sort of changes a little bit. In the House, I am now 61st in seniority, only being there for 4.5 years, which is crazy because that means that almost 50% of the House of Delegates is gone after 4.5 years. So we don't need term limits. We have elections in the General Assembly. And so for better or for worse, that means that there are a lot of things that we haven't tried before, but there are also things that we've tried before and people don't remember how they went down. And so the hope is that we don't make silly mistakes more than anything else. So some of the stuff that I've been working on is always school to prison pipeline stuff. So we eliminated the use of disorderly conduct in our schools for students. That's something that myself and Senator McClellan and Delegate Jeff Bourne have been working on for the last 3.5 years. We also had some school incident reports, meaning that as long as it's a misdemeanor, the teachers don't have to report unless they choose to, which is important to being able to reduce the school to prison pipeline. On firearms, I had a bill that was one of the 7 that the governor carried that were particularly important for making sure that people who
got my daughter dancing in the background.
Making
sure dancing when I was beating him at basketball earlier.
You know what?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. I just love the idea of you having an alley-oop on them. So we also had a bill on making sure that people who are the subject of permanent protective orders don't have access to a firearm. And then we've been doing a lot on energy efficiency issues and making sure that we are able to sort of open up some of our energy purchasing to a wider variety of people and hopefully being able to sort of, I don't want to ever say deregulate, but certainly offer additional competition to our energy market. Right. So those are some of the things that I've been working on. But, I think one of the things that Senator Mason's been working on a lot has been our foster care system, because there was a process that you were involved in, I guess, 1.5 years ago that's starting to bear fruit now.
Well, Mike, the extreme risk protection work that Mike's doing is crucial. And I think an example of how the process works, where the bill started 1 year or 2 ago is not where it ended up. And so we listened, we made adjustments along the way to assuage people's concerns. Hey, some people are never going to like those bills. I understand that. But we did all we could to try to make sure that we got the best product that we could. His bill on some competition in energy, boy, he and Jeff Bourne did a lot of work on that. That scared me because, again, back to what he said earlier, we're a part-time legislator. And when one very respected guy stands up in front of me who I used to serve with in House and says, this is not deregulation, don't even think it is. And then a very respected former Virginia State Senator stands up and says, this is absolutely deregulation. It's one of those is not an energy expert. Who do I believe?
Exactly.
But Mike and Jeff did a great job of resurrecting their bills, adjusting, working with Dominion and trying to say, hey, we're going to go down this path. You can work with us or we can fight you. And they had a big win there that we brought those bills back in Senate Commerce and Labor. Yes, I've done some, it's funny, this year I worked with the distillers. I worked with the Secretary of Natural Resources and the Department of Forestry. I worked with social services with fingerprinting and childcare. seems that I was kind of all over the place with a lot of things that people generally brought me. But one of the things that I was disappointed in was we had a kinship care program.
Oh, yeah.
That if it wasn't working out in foster care, and these children had to be in foster care, which is a very rigorous process and system. If it wasn't working out, this would have afforded them the opportunity to go with a relative in a kin gap situation and be funded just as if they were in foster care. We got $900,000 a year in the Senate budget, 1.8 overall. Took it over to the House. The House gave me an extremely fair hearing, long hearing, heard me out, but it wasn't in the House budget. And as I mentioned waivers before, they put their money towards waivers. They were very polite and apologetic because they love my bill, but unfortunately that kind of died on the vine over there. One thing that I came up with this year, the Richmond Times-Dispatch did a 3-part story called Unguarded. And it talked about patients, generally mentally ill patients, who had been in hospitals and or disabled, and the hospital could do nothing for them anymore, but they were indigent and they had nowhere to go. One particular situation in Richmond, a lawyer was coming and bringing the case to the court on behalf of the hospital, and then being appointed the guardian for the people that they were removing from the hospital. In 13 cases, he did this like 150, 60 times, but 13 times when he relinquished his guardianship of the patient down the road, he said, but if they're ever readmitted to that hospital again, I will automatically become the guardian. And I just, I'm a layman, I'm a non-lawyer, but when I read that story, I just thought that was an atrocious practice. And the Courts of Justice Committee on the Senate side filled with lawyers, and the Courts of Justice Civil Subcommittee on the House side filled with lawyers, helped me along the way to craft a bill and constantly change a product that we got passed, and that will never happen again. And so that's one I'm particularly proud of.
You know what is interesting about that, though, is that's because you're a citizen legislator, that you're reading the newspaper every day, you're sort of active in the community that you're in, and you're able to respond as you see something arise. If we were living in Richmond for 11 months out of the year, that's not something that we would be interacting with. It's not something that would be even on our radar. So it's one of the nice things about actually being back at home and being able to be responsive.
Yeah, it's funny. My mother asked me if I'd read it, and I said, gosh, they're so involved. I've got them on my side table ready to read, but I haven't done it yet. Came back after Thanksgiving, and I read it, and I was just astounded. So it was a late-breaking entry of mine. So I don't know how we're doing questions. Maybe somebody can help us with that. But we'd love to.
Are you ready for questions?
Oh, Lord. I hope so.
The voice of.
All right, we've got some folks with raised hands. All right, Jenny Wertman, I'm going to call on you first.
Okay, hi guys.
Hey, Jenny.
I'd like to change the subject for a minute, and I know we've won the 2-year battle to get a constitutional amendment on the ballot in November for redistricting. Can you talk a little bit about where legislation is to iron out the nuts and bolts on how fair redistricting will work?
I'll let Mike kick that off, but I love, Jenny, thank you. I love that we talk for 30 minutes about all these things. And, the first question may be a fairly monumental topic that we didn't even brush.
Didn't even get to.
Welcome to 10,000 things in 60 days, right?
Yeah, 22 years of backup. So, one of the things that's been most difficult for us to be able to figure out right now is, given the current constitutional system that we saw set up in the 1970s, is what is a way to be able to eliminate legislators out of the process of picking their own districts. And that's been the most important thing that we've been talking about for a long time. In the last year and a half, part of that has been the redistricting amendment put forth by One Virginia 2021. And that's something that I certainly have been supportive of up until this point. And then as we got into this session, I started to have some concerns. And this is something that, I raised with a number of other people. But the biggest thing is that I want to make sure that we are protecting communities of color, and that we have put in our situation where we are, if there is not going to be a Voting Rights Act any longer, which is a big question on the federal level, that we are enshrining into our Constitution and to our state levels a way of being able to protect communities of color and communities of interest. One of the things that I liked about the constitutional amendment is that it removes legislators from the process. What I was hoping for was that there would be enabling legislation that would also protect communities of interest and communities of color. What we found over on the House side, unlike the Senate, was that when we were sent the constitutional amendment, we were not sent the enabling legislation in the same way. That got bottled up over in the Senate side, and so we had a amendment that had all of the negatives, but none of the positives. And so I was very concerned that we were not going to be able to protect ongoing communities of interest and communities of color. Now that's all by way of saying that I was hoping that the perfect could be the companion to the good, but that ended up not being the case. And so now we have just the constitutional amendment and none of the enabling legislation. So obviously I'm going to be fighting for the constitutional amendment because I don't think that I or Senator Mason or anybody else should be the ones who are making these decisions. But I'd hope, and I've been asking for the governor to call us back into session at some point to be able to have some sort of fair enabling legislation to be able to protect communities of color. But I think that as we make work on the constitutional amendment, we should recognize that we're not just doing this for 2021. We're doing this for 2031 and 2041 and 2051. And we have an opportunity to be able to get this right. And we have an opportunity to be able to work hard on this. You know, the most important thing is that we not find ourselves in a situation like what we were in 2010 and 2011, where senators and delegates were making their own decisions for themselves. Yeah. And so I think we're at least on their way for that. Monty?
You know, and that was, you know, there is a marked difference. You know, we alluded to it a little earlier with some of the legislation that came from the House, but this is one place that there is a marked difference between the two chambers. We passed the Constitutional Amendment 38-2. Mamie Locke and Louise Lucas carried the enabling legislation to women of color to address some of the very things that we had heard, issues that have arisen over the last year or so. And we sent those bills overwhelmingly to the House, where we were pleased that they ultimately got a hearing, but it wasn't guaranteed until down the stretch. And so what got bottled up was a competing piece of legislation that came over to us. And then unfortunately in conference committee, there were several new demands made by the House side that had not been present before. And so that enabling legislation that Mike talks about did not come out. But I am still very optimistic that we can do things. I mean, look at the redrawing of the House of Delegates and the people elected from those redrawing. So, I mean, just look at the diversity that came from the last election after having those House districts redrawn by a special master. I understand there's some concern of a very conservative state Supreme Court having a say. That was a part of Louise Lucas's legislation. So I think now that we've gotten the constitutional amendment behind us and sending that to the people, where I expect it to be overwhelmingly supported, I think that as two chambers and as a body, we will be able to come together and come up with legislation, enabling legislation that, as Mike said, protects all people, people of color, people in communities. I really am very optimistic about where we go from here.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, we have a question from Stan that's been chatted to us, and it is, will the DMV have a grace period for vehicle safety inspections? I'm assuming that's related to coronavirus.
Huh. So I will say this. So safety inspections remain as they have been. They're going to be every other year as opposed to every year. But we're
No. Don't try to slip that in on us.
I'm sorry. Did you get it back to every
We
year?
got it back, man.
Oh, all right. So the Senate did its work. All right. We came in with none. The Senate came in with every year, and we settled on every year.
Every year.
So the Senate's won. As for a grace period during COVID, I actually don't know the answer to that.
Well, and so I mean, there seems to be a little bit of a cross because DMV, that would be an auto inspection, not so much a DMV matter. but with things that DMV is closed, like maybe so license extensions or license renewals, I think I have seen something along the lines of that, but you know what? That's something we'll follow up with and make sure. I saw Commissioner Holcomb send us some emails today about things that are not taking place because of the closures. So if your license needs to be renewed or you have to have work being done there, you know, we will follow up and make sure that there are extensions and see and again broadcast out to the group how long they are.
That's an excellent question, though. I don't have an answer to that. Yeah. All right. There you go. Good job.
Okay. Next question. This one's from the host. This is from me, Jen Tierney. Voting.
I can't hear you very well. No.
I said voting. Lots of voting changes this year. Talk to us about that.
You want to shoot?
So Virginia has instituted no excuse absentee voting from this point forward, starting in the November election, at least any election from July 1st. Not only that, but we have taken away the requirement for a photo ID. We've lessened the opportunities for people to be rejected when they're collecting signatures. We have done everything we can to be able to move somebody from their car to the ballot box as quickly as possible and to be able to make access to the ballot box the highest priority of the Democratic majority, at least in the House. And the Senate has followed suit. I mean, some really amazing things that we've done on voting issues.
Yeah, we've talked about forever making it easier to vote, not harder. You know, and quite frankly, I felt like both sides have overplayed the importance of the photo ID. I think there are some very relevant points on both sides, but we've gone back to being able to prove that you live at the address, you are who you say you are, and sign an affidavit that says under penalty of law, I am Monty Mason. And that's that. So I think we've done some really good things extending. I was concerned about the timeline that we were extending. You know, for a variety of reasons, my personal thought on letting people vote early is a little shorter than I think than most, just because I think a lot of things happen down the stretch that you don't want to get too far out and have people, you know, I mean, look at the primary, the number of people in other states that had voted, or even our state who had voted. And by the time they got to election, 6 of the candidates are gone. So, but we will continue to work on that. But it, you know, again, it was another one of the monumental things that took shape, that we want more people participating in the process. And, you know, I had some people concerned about the holiday that we chose to do away with to make election day a day off. But I worked it the other way. It was more important to me for people to have election day as a holiday so you could get out and vote than it was picking which holiday we did. So,
Senator Mason, I just wanted to follow up on something. So actually the governor today directed that the Virginia Department of State Police suspends the enforcement of motor vehicle safety inspections for 60 days. This is something that I was just getting a phone a friend from. So I actually didn't know the answer to. But so in answer, Stan, to your question, there's a 60-day grace period that's going to be coming for all ID cards for the next 60 days.
For IDs or inspections?
For inspections, but it also seems to be also for additional identification cards. But once again, I'm getting this from phone a friend from Georgia.
No, that's cool.
So
and if that just happened today, that's great. I mean, that's a great topic. Obviously, it's how topical that question is.
Okay. Next up, we have a question from Christine. Christine, what's your question?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Christine? You there?
Sorry. Yeah. Okay.
There she is.
Hey,
Hello.
Christine.
Hey, but could you talk a little bit about some of the efforts made this session to address predatory lenders?
Ooh.
Monty, that's all you.
I mean, how about that? Another monumental topic. So Newport News has been the epicenter of the fight against predatory lending. And to David Yancey's credit, he fought it for a lot of years. John Miller fought it for a lot of years. Mike and I have taken them up and continued. Mamie Locke has been a huge leader in this as
Absolutely.
carried the legislation this time. We really went as dramatically after this industry as we could have. In fact, I'm a little concerned that we went too aggressively because the third month of July, well, it doesn't take shape until next July, but the third week of July next year, there's still going to be people that need short-term loans, and I just hope there are legitimate groups out there to give them to them. One thing we did is we really cracked down on some of the just outrageous fees associated with predatory lending, targeting people, getting them in a place where you've loaned them $200, $300, $400, and then 3 years later they've paid you back $3,600. I mean, and they just kept recurring. So again, that's something that's been bottled up for years that we should have done something about. I do think it's one of the things we have to watch and make sure that the pendulum didn't swing too dramatically, that people still have the ability to get the type of short-term small loan help that they need in July of next year when it takes shape. But we pushed the effective date off and have a chance to make sure we do away with the ones we want gone and still can help people that need help.
Monty, can I ask you sort of an unrelated but related follow-up?
Sure.
One of the things that we talked a lot about this session that didn't get as much play in the media was offshore wind. I know that's something that you were fighting a lot about. That ended up having more controversy over the House than I was expecting than it did in the Senate. But I mean, you were sort of the generator of a lot of that. Do you have
Louise Lucas and I each carried an offshore wind bill. And so, first of all, my seatmate, Jennifer McClellan, is a rock star. And she and Rip Sullivan carried the Clean Energy Act. That was just the most mammoth undertaking I think you could see as legislators. And it addressed solar, it addressed wind, it addressed energy efficiency. I mean, it is a gargantuan piece of legislation. But we had individual component parts in case it collapsed under its own weight, and it did not. Wind energy, but one of the points that came out dominantly from the other side in this conversation was these renewables cost substantially more money. And I carried the wind bill, and it is the shining example of renewable energy that costs gargantuanly more than just coal-fired plants. But in order to move towards renewables, we have to understand that it costs more to produce. But this is just, we always hear in Southeastern Virginia that we need to diversify our economy. This is the opportunity for Southeastern Virginia where else do you see a fully mature supply chain elsewhere in the world, in Europe, with a non-existent industry in the United States of America? We have an unimpeded port with no bridges to pass. These things are 3 football fields tall. We need to manufacture the turbines. We need to build a ship to do it in the United States. And we have a port that has staging area for essentially the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. So this is as big an economic development opportunity for Virginia and the Port of Virginia, Southeastern Virginia, but all of Virginia really, as it is an enormous renewable energy opportunity. As Mike said, some of my friends in the House decided they wanted to help me and almost killed my bill. But Mike and some of my real friends stepped up to the plate and made sure that didn't happen.
So one of the things that Senator Mason is talking about that he's sort of being a little coy about is the massive amount of infrastructure investment that's going to come from building this industry. So there is no industry in North America right now that manufactures large-scale wind turbines. They're all in Germany and France. And so if you want to be able to have a large-scale wind turbine, you have to import them from somewhere in the North Atlantic. So right now, if we're going to have the level of wind turbines that we're going to have in the Mid-Atlantic, in the North Atlantic, and other places, we have to build them here in Hampton Roads. So the shipyards right now is approximately 26,500 people, all right? That's a massive industry that supports the entire Hampton Roads area. We have an opportunity to build a brand new industry that's between 10 and 15,000 people. So we're talking about something that is over half the size of the shipyard, that is brand new, that's going to have to start in the next 5 to 10 years and will be ongoing. It's not going to be a one-time thing, but we'll be continuing to feed new green energy across the eastern seaboard for the foreseeable future. And that's right here in Hampton Roads. That's massive.
That's right. And we read it into the code. That's the important thing here is Dominion has a project on the, hey, Dominion hating is a sport these days because you don't have to do any homework. You just say they're evil. Well, they are leading the charge on wind with 2,600 megawatts in a field in their lease area. We read into the code 5,200 megawatts, 2 times that amount. So that is a project that we're going to seed and start with them, but with a great deal of competition, with a great deal of targets for low-income employees and workers, Virginia workers. But at the same time, we signaled to the industry that, yes, this project's on the horizon. We're reading into the code by 2035, I think, 5,200, twice that amount of wind energy, so that we can signal to industry, we're serious about this in Virginia, and we want you to come here and locate and set up shop.
I'm sorry, Jen, I think I saw that there were a couple of hands up as well.
Yep, Camilla's got a question.
Hey.
Hey guys, this is probably not anything that's very high on your radar, but as a physician, it's high on mine. What about the increasing the tobacco tax?
The what?
Increasing the what?
Increasing the tax on cigarettes.
Oh, yeah. I mean, increased by 4%.
That is the leading way to cut down on people's smoking, is to make it more expensive.
You see an increase in the tobacco tax. It's upwards of 40 cents. In some localities, it's already been roughly that level. What you're seeing is that there's been a difference between the counties and the cities in that regard. The cities have had opportunities on that the counties have not. And so you're starting to see a leveling of that. Virginia is still going to have one of the cheapest tobacco taxes on the eastern seaboard. But, I believe we're now going to be on par with North Carolina. I'm sorry, Yanni, is that about right?
I think that I was just sitting here thinking it puts us still at the low end, but we raised it dramatically, and it puts us on par with like the 5 states around us. That's, Camilla, that's always been argued that is one of the most progressive, that the lower income folks get hit the hardest there. I've never been a smoker.
That's a really silly argument in my opinion, because it's the leading cause of preventable death in the United States.
I get it, and been pretty much but as you well know, Altria's got thousands of employees sitting here in Virginia, and so we've always balanced. But I will tell you that I did not hear a peep out of the industry lobbyists opposed to it this year. So I think the tide has turned there.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, next I believe we have Jim Eisenhower.
Uh-oh. Hey,
Jim? You there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Wanted to ask the question on what protections that the legislature came out with for discrimination, particularly the LGBTQ community. If you can sort of go a summary of that.
Monty, do you want to do that, or you want me?
Another enormous, it's funny. Every question we've had, it makes you just say, wow, at the things that accomplished. Adam Eben and Mark Sickles have worked for years to make sure that equal rights for all people, regardless of race, creed, sexual orientation, is a reality. And for the first time, it is. The Virginia Values Act passed. There was some work along the way, and then Mark Levine had a bill that we made sure had some religious protections in it, but he wasn't happy with some of the things that we forced in the bill. But but Adam and Mark, I mean, it just, what an amazing day. And, you know, the number of transgender constituents that I have that came to Richmond and sought me out to thank me is just, I mean, it's moving, because, you know, the struggles and the fights and the discrimination that they have faced every step of their lives. And we, with legislation, said no more, never again. I have often said, I'm a man from Farmville, Virginia, and if I don't understand that separate but equal is anything but, I've missed the boat of history. And so I have been a proud supporter of every step of the way of equal rights for all people. And we accomplished another set of monumental legislation this year that I was darn proud to vote for.
Okay, we got 1 minute before we're going to wrap this up. So we can't wrap it up, I think, without a comment on the ERA.
Hey, imagine that.
Important thing.
Even my dog's
first week
rally on that.
Hey, hold on. So let
Go
me
ahead.
ask a question for a second. So Henry, what does it mean when we say the Equal Rights Amendment? What does that mean? That everybody is equal. What does that mean?
It doesn't matter if you're different or not.
That's right. It doesn't matter if you're different or not, that you get to be treated the same underneath the law no matter what, right? If you're a boy or you're a girl or whoever you identify with, right? You're always going to be the same, right? That's why they call it the Equal Rights Amendment. It's kind of important, right? Do you know Virginia was the final state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment this year? And that was just something we did in the first week of the General Assembly session. So kind of a big deal, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right? Yeah, okay. So that's somebody who's about to fall
Well,
asleep.
that was a great one. That passed the Senate 27-13 last year. I guess it was the same. We may have picked up a couple more this year. Maybe I think it may have been 29-11 this year. I need to go check. But talk about an exciting day to see all these people that worked so hard in the gallery. And we're sending a bill over that we sent over last year, knowing there were the votes on the floor to pass it, and it never made it. So we held a special meeting of the Privileges and Collections Committee, like the first couple days of session, and passed that baby out of P&E to get it to the floor meeting, get it to the House, and get it to the governor's side. Neat being a part of that history.
Wow.
Okay, well, Monty and Mike, thanks for participating in our very first attempt at an electronic forum. For everybody who tuned in, thanks for putting up with our technological glitches. We spent a lot of this week trying to figure out how to reach out and how to make information to our membership. So we will do more of this, and we'll only get better at it.
We'll learn.
And if there are things around the coronavirus or anything else that you see, you want us to know, you want understanding of, hit us at our official site. Georgia and Thomas are working with us every day to try to keep up with what is an ever-changing environment. And we want to get as much information out as we can and help as many people as we possibly can.
That's all we could ask for. Hey, Jen, thank you and everybody on the Williamsburg-James City County Committee for everything that you guys have done to put this together. And thank you all for everything that you've been doing to support us, because we're hoping to be able to support you and be able to do everything we can in this time of need. So thank you all so very much, and hopefully we can answer some more of your questions sometime in the near future.
Hope so.
Okay. All right, thanks all, and good night.
Thank you all. Great work.